Well, good day, everyone. Today, we will be exploring the key insights into the EN 1831 standard. I'm confident that many of you, especially those impacted by the Red Delegated Act on Cyber Articles, are diving into achieving the compliance ahead of the deadlines, right? So since we are all on it, we believe that this session, as a reminder, will provide maybe some clarity on the structure and also maybe also used to support your efforts, okay? So first, let me walk you through the agenda. So we're going to see a first introduction. Next, we'll move to the application section. We will be briefly explain the application of the standard. Following that, we will discuss the assessment, how to approach it, and the structure of the EN 1831. And from there, we will be exploring the requirements, specifically the technical requirements that you can find in this standard, okay? After, to finalize, we will be covering the mapping, just to show you that there's some mapping that might be useful if you have already in place other compliance with other standards, existing standards, and a very brief conclusion, okay? So let's go through the introduction. So the standard EN 1831 was developed by the technical committee, the GT13. For the ones that doesn't know CEN and CENELEC, these are the two of the three officially recognized European standardization organizations, the third being ETSI. And this standard was mainly developed to support the essential requirements supplementing the Red Directive, and especially in the application referred to Articles 3.3 D, E, and F, as Luis explained. So the standard, it's based on three parts, and each part has its own objectives. The first one, the part one, it covers general cybersecurity requirements for all types of radio equipment that are connected to internet. And it ensures that the devices operate securely and preventing harm to networks or service degradation. The second part, part two, targets the radio equipment processing personal data. It can be internet-connected devices, but also wearables, childcare equipment, and toys. And finally, part three, it applies to devices handling virtual money or financial transactions, and it ensures that strong measures are in place to prevent the fraud and secure financial data during transactions. Each part, as you know, are mapped with each of the three cybersecurity requirements from the Red Directive. So, as the reminder, the Red Delegated Act will become mandatory on August the 1st of 2025. Currently, it's not harmonized. I've seen some of the questions in the chat, and probably will be harmonized with some restrictions, okay? We will see these maybe in January. So to start with, the baseline EN 1831 standard has been developed to strengthen the security of the radio equipment. So specifically, it protects its assets against what are the common cybersecurity threats, okay? Additionally, you will find in this standard that provides guidance material, including lists of examples. Why? Well, this standard is horizontal standard, so that means that it's applicable to a wide range of products and technologies. So that's why there's a pretty good guidance material that you can use in order to use as a guidance for compliance. So about application, moving forward to its application, my colleague Luis has already explained which devices the Red Delegated applies to. But here we will be exploring the applications of the standard itself and highlighting maybe the main points that you need to take into account as a manufacturer. So first of all, you need to know that the standard introduced the concept of mechanisms, which are essentially guiding users on when and how to apply specific security measures, okay? These security mechanisms are focused on two main aspects. So we are assessing them by checking its applicability and sufficiency. Okay, we will see this later on when we go through the assessment criteria. And if it's not applicable, so if you face a requirement that it's not applicable to your device, then no more assessment is needed for that particular requirement. But if this mechanism is applicable, then you will be, the device will be assessed against functional and conceptual assessment, okay? So, as we said, these are mechanisms, not solutions. So the standard focus on security mechanisms and does not dictate any specific solution, okay? So it's mainly the manufacturer who tailors their implementation because it depends on the intended use and the risk assessment that the manufacturer does. It's the decision of all this analysis to require one mechanism or another, okay? It applies, as I said, a wide range of products. This is an horizontal standard, and it adapts to context, meaning the appropriateness and strength of the security measure, it will definitely depend on the risk assessment. So it's not the same, so we don't need to apply the same level of security. For example, if it's a high-risk device, such as a radio communication system used by emergency services, than if it's just a simple temperature sensor in a greenhouse. So let's say that the intended use it's totally different. So this standard allows to adapt to context depending on that particular intended use. Okay. And as I said, you will find some guidance in the same standard that would allow you to know how the requirement, the security requirement, is assessed. So we said that when you're doing the assessment through the standard, we will be checking, let's say, the three-fold process. So first of all, we are going to check whether this security mechanism is applicable to the equipment, okay? If not, the related assessment, so all the sufficiency, will be skipped. And on the other hand, the sufficiency means that if the mechanism is applicable, I'm gonna examine documentation, I'm gonna test the completeness and the sufficiency assessment, okay? We will see this in more detail, but mainly it's documental assessment and testing assessment. Okay, then we move forward to the assessment, okay? And as a manufacturer, you may think, okay, currently we are in assessment stage, but before reaching this point, what is required? So first, the manufacturer needs to provide and prepare a risk analysis, a risk assessment. So with this risk assessment, you will be able to build all the documentation that you need for the standard itself. Once you have the risk analysis, you have the evidence in place, then you can go to the assessment and testing by nowadays only for a notified through a notified body. So one of the questions that some manufacturers have, it's they're okay, how do I start? Do we have any reference on the cybersecurity risk assessment? Well, the standard says that as a manufacturer, you need to do a risk assessment, but it's optional to use the method that is provided inside of the standard. So you can use a strike method, which is inside of the EN 1831. You can use ETSI risk management process, but at the end, this risk analysis will output a list of assets, a list of threats, and with this, you will be able to build all the evidences that will be in place. So if we go through the structure, okay? So we have like mechanisms, for example, access control mechanism. We can have a secure update mechanism, a network monitoring mechanism. And for each of them, we will have the different sections. first of all, the applicability, as we said, and then we will go through the assessment itself, okay? So the assessment will consist, as I said, on a documental part and a testing, which consists on functional testing and security testing. The assessment criteria, it's precise and have objective definitions. It's technology agnostic, okay? And we will need to have this documentation for compliance testing, okay? So as a manufacturer, you need to provide the required information. In the different sections, you will find a specific one, which is the implementation categories, where the standard itself proposes you different common ways to implement that particular mechanism. So for example, if it's an authentication mechanisms, you will find an implementation category of a digital signature. So there's some implementation categories that can guide you on how to implement that particular mechanism. But of course, it can be other ways that are not in the same standard. This required information section, it's quite important for the manufacturers because it will list all the information that will be required to perform all the assessments, okay? You will find that all the information elements are labeled specifically in a specific format, as you see here an example, e.info ACM for access control mechanisms. And it will list all the evidences that you need to provide for this assessment, okay? The expected general information would be, of course, the intended equipment functionality. This is very important. Technical information that you have, declare best practices, specific details of the design if needed, and the security risk analysis and assessment. So as the conceptual assessment, we have what we do, the evaluator do, is examine the documentation to see if it explains the chosen security mechanisms and why certain chosen are made. Here, there's a specific step, which is the decision tree, where the manufacturer provides justification whether that particular security requirement is applicable or is not applicable to their device and its intended use. Okay, this is the decision tree step. So how does it work? So in each requirement and each security mechanisms, you will see that there is a specific flow that you would follow. So the thing is that in the same, for each node of decision, you will need to provide a justification whether is protection required or not, okay? So I don't know, to put some example, if you have an equipment, so here for each asset, if it's protection required, yes and no. But if it's no, it's not applicable. You need to justify why it's not protection required. This is a general one. This is not part of the standard itself. It's just an example. But the thing here is that it's a different way to proceed, but it allows to have an harmonized way to assess these decisions on whether the security mechanism is applicable or not. So as I said, mainly the decision trees will be translated in a kind of table where you will say, okay, for this node specific, for this question, this is the answer is yes or no, and even if it's yes or not, no, you as a manufacturer need to give a justification. Okay. Okay. Next one, the functional testing. For the functional testing, the evaluator will review the provided documentation and will test, for example, whether this particular implementation of the security mechanism is there. Okay. So mainly what we are doing here is to verifying the accuracy of the documentation, but this time through hands-on testing, okay? Later, we go through the security testing, But the security testing, this phase of evaluation process goes beyond simply checking if the requirement features are present. In this case, it involves actively testing the equipment to determine that the security mechanisms are adequate and effective in a real-world scenario. So, for example, security testing can be assessed with fuzzing techniques, some penetration testings to simulate attacks, for example, denial of service attacks. We can do also code review to analyze if the software implementation will indeed implement that particular security mechanism, stress testing, and other techniques that can be tailored to the type of device. But you may think, okay, but what are the requirements? What kind of requirements will be assessed in a device like this? Okay, first of all, we need to differentiate that there's different type of assets: security assets, network assets, private assets, privacy assets, and financial, depending, of course, on the part that we are assessing. Security assets is an asset which is transversal to all the articles, all the parts of the EN 1831. But as you can imagine, network assets, it's primarily associated with the requirement 3.3D, privacy assets with part 2, 3.3E, and financial assets with the part or the article that aims to prevent fraud, or that they are or encompassing any monetary resources or assets that have financial value. In the requirements, you will find that mainly in the part, if we compare the different parts of the EN 1831, you will find that the requirements are more or less the same. Maybe in part 2, there's some more, okay? But in part 3, for example, they are applicable the same requirements, but this time, depending in part 2 or part 3, they are tuned in a way to protect the assets. So, for example, in part 1, it will be based on protecting the security assets and the network assets. In part 2, all these requirements will be based in protecting the privacy assets and the security assets. And in part 3, it will be based on trying to protect the financial assets and, of course, the security assets, since they are transversal. But what kind of requirements are there? So you can find requirements such as access control mechanisms. So mainly, if you have an asset, you need to control that nobody can access that particular asset or read it or modify it or so on. So you need to have some access control mechanism in the interfaces where assets can be accessed, okay? Of course, authentication mechanisms in order to avoid to read, modify, or use any network function to affect some assets. Security updates, they must be authenticated, so they should be installed with integrity and authenticity. Secure storage mechanisms, so here what we are trying is to prevent somebody to extract information from hard drives directly, and try to protect these assets with confidentiality and integrity properties in case they need it. Others are secure communication mechanisms. Here, in case that you need to send some assets through some interfaces from your device, then you need to be sure that these interfaces have some protocols in place that ensure that there's secure communication, so that nobody, as a man in the middle, can extract information from the channel. There's the resilience mechanism, mainly to mitigate the effects of denial of service attack, network monitoring mechanisms, and traffic control mechanisms, which are the main goal. It's also to detect these denial of service attacks. And confidential cryptographic keys, which we verify the appropriateness of the keys, also the generation mechanism, so that we are preventing to have static values of the keys, static values in the source code, for example. The general equipment capabilities here, what we assess is to make sure that no publicly known exploitable vulnerabilities are in place for the device that it's about to enter to the EU market. And also we check that there is the general equipment capabilities, like limit the exposure service via related network interfaces. Will be the cryptography. So we are assessing that we have the best practice cryptography, mainly with the guidance that it's giving the standard itself, like the SOGI's grid cryptographic mechanisms or the NIST ones. So we are assuring that the cryptography is strong enough not to be broken. Okay. And if you are already compliant, or if you are familiar with other standards such as ETSI 303645, you may find useful to learn and understand that that this standard, the 18031, can be used, or sorry, the ETSI can be used to also give compliance, but provided the mapping it's taken into account. What does it mean? So in the same standard, you will find some annexes that allows you to map the requirements from the EN 1831 standard to ETSI 303645, but also to the 62443, and the industrial system, for 62443.4.2, okay? And these requirements are mapped to the current standard, so you can check which provision from the ETSI it's going to be used to give compliance to the current standard. But you will find that there are some security mechanisms that are not covered in the ETSI. So that means that as a notified body or as a laboratory, we will be checking that that you are covering this in another way. Okay. So we need to fill these gaps that are between this standard and existing standards that you may have compliance already to. Okay. And that's all for my presentation. So as a conclusion, as you know, there's a deadline, August 2025. So I know that most of you are already getting ready. So this is a well-structured standard. So, but you need to work with the required information section to ensure the streamlined compliance. Okay, this is a recommendation that we give to you. And if you're a manufacturer, follow the first steps. So make a risk assessment, prepare the evidence list, and structure the content. And also you can check the supporting documents such as the Blue Guide. And of course, if you have any questions, do not forget to contact us. We will be more than happy to attend you and answer the questions that you may have. Okay. So that's all. Please share any questions that you may have at the email info@apluslaboratories.com. Don't forget to do it, and we will reply as soon as possible to give you the most accurate answer. Okay?